Hello, in this video we'll be looking at Operation Enduring Victory. As we all know, this operation was a success. It held off the Pharaoh swarm long enough to ensure that Project Zero Dawn was completed on time, although not 100%, but it was functional enough to ensure that life started anew. However, in what circumstances could Operation Enduring Victory have allowed humanity more time, or if not all the time, to survive? We're going to be looking into what sort of things General Harris must have considered when designing the operation in the first place. From now on, I will call it just Enduring Victory, just to keep it clarified. So we're going to be looking first of all at what sort of challenges General Harris faced, and then we're going to see if we can combat them with my own theories as well as a few bits of evidence to back it up, and then we'll spin off at the end into some wild and crazy theories. Should be fun. So let's first of all take a look at what challenges faced Enduring Victory.
By the time the glitch was noticed, it was already too late. Nothing could stop the Pharaoh plague. Nothing can. Its robots will continue to replicate and devour the biosphere. Life on Earth will be destroyed. Our planet reduced to a barren sphere. Global extinction is inevitable. Cracking a code set would take half a century. At best, we've got 16 months.
So on the front line we have the Deathbringer that has the missiles machine gun. This was the main unit used to wipe out most of humanity, followed shortly by the Corruptor that enslaved other robots to its command and made repairs on the chariot line itself, followed finally by the Horus, which produced the units. These were the main body of the attack. They produced all the units that followed, and it was imperative that these were destroyed to stop the Pharaoh plague from spreading. However, as we know, that proved quite difficult, and eventually they swarmed over the base and finally got into Horizon Zero Dawn territory, but never actually made it to the project itself.
No matter how many we kill, the robots just keep exponentially making more.
So facing these challenges, could the swarm have been killed off immediately? Well, we know for a fact that the glitch started at Heart Turmoil Energy Combine. What if it had been stopped there and then? The staff reported the glitch, that the robots were not obeying commands, that they were going off base, and that was the start of the glitch. Now, rather than face that head on, Ted Farago tried to cover it up and keep it secret. But what if he hadn't? What if he instead immediately went to robot commands? First thing they'd have to do is shut down all the units around them and destroy any units surrounding them. We know for a fact that the Heart Turmoil had a Horus. We could see that in the video before. So that was producing the robots. So yes, they're already going to start to see biomass reduction and production of more units. But destroying the surrounding units before they even start would help a great deal to stopping the swarm. The second thing would be to send in machines of the past to destroy them, tanks, aircrafts, that sort of thing. Now, if that was done quick enough and with enough haste, it might have stopped the swarm there and then. But as we know, Ted Farago was more interested in publicity than he was with concerns about stopping the swarm. He only started to panic when he realized that he could no longer go in and effect the updates he needed to stop the swarm, at which point he called Elizabeth Sobeck, knowing full well that she would take care of it. Well, she did in her own way, but not in the way that Ted planned. But he was determined to keep this a secret, so we know for a fact that this swarm wasn't stopped there. But if he had, they would have had a very good chance of stopping it there. However, we know for a fact that didn't happen.
The genetic quintessence elements of our species, unmodified. Under my watch, our activities and initiatives will comply with the 2034 clone provisions and the 2048 Raleigh Accords.
So these accords wouldn't have gone in place without genetic experimentation in the past, cloning and the like, and we know Dr. Elizabeth Sobeck mentions cloning when she's considering creating Horizon Zero Dawn, and that she's worried that she won't have enough time to finish the project in her lifetime, so she would need to clone herself, training up a clone to replace her in the various essential parts of her work. So cloning was definitely an issue back then, and maybe at one stage a problem to put these laws into place. However, it could have been used on the front line. Now, there's nothing in the records to suggest that they didn't clone. Dr. Sobeck talks about how a young Ted Farrow would be taught by an older Ted Farrow. So that kind of suggests to me that the clones developed at the same pace as normal human beings. So it wouldn't really be advantageous to provide clones on the front line, judging by how long the battle lasted, which was only 16 months tops. So there wouldn't have been enough time to clone a load of people and then just have them fight the battle for us, or at least clone an army and have them fight on the front line, because there just wasn't enough time to develop. Genetic resequencing could have helped in terms of providing maybe night vision to people, but ultimately I think it would have been bad for morale, judging by how human people would be at the end of it. Yes, they won, but then there would be an issue about how human they'd become. Maybe at best it would have bought a few months, though. Genetic altering of the human genome might have provided maybe a couple more months. Night vision would have helped, resilience to elements maybe. Who knows what could have been put into place. But I think ultimately why the whole endeavour just failed on a basic level is basically time. This line of inquiry of genetic manipulation, modification and cloning just didn't have enough time to be put into place on a large scale. The buildings of the units would have to be 3D printed. You'd need to have everyone's DNA collected together, and as fast and as quick as Enduring Victory was put into effect, there were still people who weren't willing to fight, people who didn't fight, people that stayed in their bunkers, in their shelters, and found other means of survival, so didn't go on the front line. Which brings me nicely to my next point. So we know that the generals offered incentives to go and fight, clean records for example, but we also know that there was the general incentive of, hey, if we don't do this we're all going to die, but not everyone fought. Some people hid, some people cowered away, some people ended up in bunkers or in domes, some families couldn't fight, the children certainly didn't fight, so conscription could have been put into place to make sure people fought, but there again I think that would have been very bad for morale, that people would lose perspective on the fight and more people would have hidden away. As well as that, I just don't see that conscription would have been that good in the long run, because don't forget these soldiers were being trained to fight and would probably in all likelihood die on the battlefield after their first battle. This would just have led to more biofuel for the robots. They could have just easily mowed these people down, killed them, used their bodies for biofuel. That's another missile in their hands, that's enough fuel to reach further around the planet. Conscription sounds like a good idea. It would have got more people to fight, but putting more bodies inside the swarm could have just led to a quicker extinction rate. Ultimately as well, morale, I don't see the likelihood that this was an effective method. It was a good incentive ploy from the generals to use a clean record and things similar to that, as well as the hope of in Zero Dawn taking out all the swarm. Just got to hold off the swarm with enduring victory and will survive. So it was kind of set in motion that that would always be the best incentive.
So these mechanical monstrosities, they don't just kill people, they feed off them?
Not just people, all organic matter.
Every living thing dissolved into nutrients. Millennia of evolution liquefied. The miracle of life reduced to bloody biofuel.
In a word, yes.
Hindsight's a beautiful thing, and before we go on, I thought I'd just mention this because it's not an option that I personally would have considered without hindsight. We know that the Pharaoh plagues succeeded, they broke through every line, they continued on, and they destroyed everything. But what if we remove all biomatter surrounding their area? Nuke them. And nuke the surrounding areas. Destroy everything with fire, with anything that you can. Just destroy the surrounding area and then force the plague to walk in maybe a straight line, or maybe towards the nearest city or area of countryside rich enough to fuel them. In the meantime, start bombing them. We know that there was some successful raids on Horuses, that they were bombed, that they were destroyed. So why not nuke the surrounding area and then bomb them and then force them into one battle where all of humanity can stand and fight them back? Could it have worked? Well, we know that humanity was in the midst of what was known as the clawback. Cyan in the Frozen Wilds certainly talks about how before the clawback there was mass extinction, mass evacuation, so there's less people in the world than there are today. But even so, I don't think there was enough transportation and enough facilities in place to evacuate that many people in that amount of time. You'd have to catch the swarm fairly early on when it's just starting to replicate into larger numbers. Don't forget, Ted Faro kept it under wraps to the point where it had become a serious problem and was starting to spread already. So a lot of people were being caught unawares, and that was providing it with a lot of fuel to start with. So it probably had the fuel to go the distance. You'd have to nuke a fair portion of land. You'd have to destroy quite a large percentage of the earth, to say nothing about fallout, ground contamination, radiation, water contamination, poison rain, poison air, and basically I think it would have just brought on the end of the world anyway. At that point, with contaminated land, contaminated air, masses displaced, even if they'd won, what sort of earth could be reclaimed? A post-apocalyptic wasteland, which is basically what they were trying to prevent in the first place. So, no, I don't think it would have worked. Also, you'd have to get permission from these countries before you destroyed them. You'd have to have the permission and the support of the people to do it, and even if you didn't and dropped those nukes anyway, and I say that knowing how monstrous that sounds, what would happen afterwards? If you had not held them back, if they had broke through the lines, there would be calls for step down, for certainly destruction. It would have just hastened the swarm, if anything. You'd have to catch them incredibly early. You'd have to get those permissions in place. I don't see it happening just due to political aspects alone. So that moves us on to our very final option.
Not exactly what you'd call a survival option. The destruction of a biosphere is not the sort of apocalypse you can wait out in a fallout shelter or a space station. There will be no Earth left to reclaim. Just a lifeless, toxic rock with several million Pharaoh robots on it, hibernating, waiting for something to eat.
So I thought a lot about how I wanted to end this video. There's a few things I wanted to talk about, really. I could have said about an aggressive AI instead of just the human intelligence that would go after the swarm more aggressively. calculate their next move and counter it. But ultimately, really, it comes down to a survival option at the end of the day. No matter what happened, the swarm was still coming, and the swarm, even if an aggressive AI could have prevailed, what state would that leave humanity? And they'd be faced with a similar problem after the war had ended. So it becomes a survival game at the very end. What steps could be taken besides Zero Dawn to ensure the knowledge and survival of the human species? Now, General Harris says that the human race can't avoid its fate, because surviving aboard a space station or underground would be, you're talking about hundreds of years, many generations, but it could still be done. That's the main point. If a small population was kept in a facility surrounded by embryos, and that if one embryo every now and again, much like the clones, was woken up and given the Apollo training, certainly be able to see the world as the ancient ones did, they could probably rebuild the world pretty well based on their own knowledge. Now that could be a threat to modern day, well, I say modern day, it would be a threat to the Nora, the different tribes, and certainly around the world, because that knowledge comes with it a great amount of power. But space station, that could be possible. Underground, that could also be possible. There's a lot of theories on survival options to go over, and honestly I don't have the time to go over all of them in this video, so I'm going to reserve that for another video, because there's just so much to talk about. There's so much to talk about on that score. I've got lists and lists of stuff I want to go over about the Odyssey, certainly what happened to that, what's its eventual fate, because don't forget, we were told that it had exploded, but could they have faked the explosion? Could the engines just have exploded? Could they limp back to Earth with what they had? They still had the alpha build of Apollo, so they had the wealth of knowledge of the ancient ones. Could someone have built a base underground with so many resources devoted to Horizon Zero Dawn projects? It's possible that someone could have snuck away or hid some resources, or built a facility of their own with so many people entrusted to its secrets. Someone could have got greedy and created their own little base or project of their own to preserve their knowledge, or their descendants to come, or certainly preserve enough to start again in the future. But it would be all depending on the knowledge of Horizon Zero Dawn itself, because at the end of the day the codes would need to be cracked for the Pharaoh robots plague to be over, and they were waiting for that to happen. So we're talking hundreds of years now, and we can pretty much guarantee that Zero Dawn got it right the first time. And there's evidence of that, certainly when Meridian was founded. In the text logs it talks about leaves, it says, but I believe it's books that were found from the old ones about farming and agriculture, which helped set up Meridian and made it as prosperous and as certainly as rich and powerful as it was, because they used some of the knowledge of the old ones to establish their city in the future, so to speak. So I'm going to leave it there. I'd love to hear your theories on this. I'd love to hear your comments below. Going forward, I've got two projects coming up, the Odyssey project and survival options afterwards, and then I've got a whole other 2 videos coming along in the pipework down the line. So I'm very sorry it's taken a long time to compose these videos. Everything's together. I have all the resources I need, so I'm just gonna put everything together, and already the other one's halfway done, so you should be seeing that next week. So I will see you there. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.